Hey y'all, what is going on? What is going on? It's your girl, Melba Pearson, Melba for Miami, Melba for Justice, and it is time for Mondays with Melba. So, this is the first one for 2022. Super excited. Took some time off over the holidays to really think through and plan some of the topics I want to tackle this year, as well as coming up with the list of dream guests that I want to have on to discuss various issues and to raise awareness around things that we're going to be dealing with this year, right? 2022 is a major election year. We've got primaries this summer. We've got the governor on the ballot in November, as well as US Senate. So there's so much live and popping this year that I want to make sure that I'm bringing you all the best information, the most accurate information as soon as possible. So I took a lot of time to plan that out. Unfortunately, 2022 kind of started on a funky tip because Rona found me. I was vaccinated. I got a breakthrough case, and I don't know who's out here saying that Omicron or whoever is mild. It was not mild for me. I was laid out for 10 days. So, a lot to say about the vaccine. I know that that's a very divisive topic for a lot of folks, but all I know is that if it took me out that badly and I was vaccinated, I can't even imagine what it would have been like for me if I was not vaccinated. So, just going to put that out there, and y'all take from that what you will. But the reason we're here today is the day we celebrate the birth of Dr. Martin Luther King. His actual birthday is on the 15th of January, but we always celebrate on this Monday every year to really look at his legacy, take time to reflect. I really love the fact that people have embraced doing a day of service around Dr. King to honor his legacy. But what I really want to call out, though, is always all these folks that are all out here performing. Some of these conservative Republicans who are going to be out here talking about, judging a man by the content, the content of his character, not the color of his skin. Meanwhile, the next day they turn around and uphold the structures of white extremism and white supremacy that Dr. King dedicated his life and lost his life fighting, right? So many times folks are all about the I have a dream speech, and that's the one quote, from Dr. King that they feel comfortable with, right? But we have to understand that Dr. King was so much more than just that one speech. He dedicated his entire life, not only just for civil rights and voting and all that, but for economic equality, to make sure that not only, Black folks have the rights that they are guaranteed under the Constitution, but also that white people and everybody can have a living wage and be able to feed their families and live a comfortable life. And again, holding America to her promise of liberty and justice for all. So I think it's very disingenuous for folks to just focus on that little sliver of Dr. King and not embrace what he was really about. And the way I want to tackle that is by reading the letter from a Birmingham jail. So he, as folks really know, that he had been out there protesting and really fighting for equal rights for all, and that got him arrested a number of times, right? So he actually sat down while he was incarcerated and drafted this letter really discussing the feelings and the struggles that he was having at the time in trying to fight for civil rights and equality, and the disappointment he felt from white moderates and from members of the clergy who are like preaching love and equality from the pulpit on Sundays, but come Monday and Tuesday, they're completely ghost when it comes to standing side by side for equality. So the letter from a Birmingham jail is quite lengthy. So I'm only going to read excerpts of it. I encourage everyone to Google it and read it in its entirety. But I'm going to really just highlight some key portions and talk a little bit about it, because one of the things that I always like to say, I once used to say that, hey, history repeats itself, right? But I was on a panel discussion, and, an older sister said to me, like, hold up. No, history rhymes, because it's not the same exact way that things happen in the past that it happens again today, but there's common themes that keep repeating over and over again. And the fact of the matter is, those that don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. So with no further ado, let's get into the letter from a Birmingham jail by Dr. King, which he wrote on April 16th, 1963. My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. If I sought to answer all the criticisms that cross my desk, my secretaries will have little time for anything other than such correspondence in the course of the day, and I would have no time for constructive work. But since I feel you are men of genuine goodwill and that your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I want to try and answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. I think I should indicate why I am here in Birmingham, since you have been influenced by the view which argues against outsiders coming in. I have had the honor of serving as president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization operating in every Southern state with headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. We have some 85 affiliated organizations across the South, and one of them is the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights. Frequently, we share staff, educational, and financial resources with our affiliates. Several months ago, the affiliate here in Birmingham asked us to be on call to engage in nonviolent direct action program if such were deemed necessary. We readily consented, and when the hour came, we lived up to our promise. So I, along with several members of my staff, am here because I was invited here. I am here because I have organizational ties here. But more basically, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. Because you know that argument keeps coming up over and over again, especially when you think about Black Lives Matter coming to protest with regards to police brutality in other cities. Oh, it's the outside agitators. This argument as old as pie. Okay, continuing with Dr. King's words. You deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement, I am sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations. I am sure that none of you would want to rest content with the superficial kind of social analysis that deals merely with the effects and does not grapple with the underlying causes. It is unfortunate that demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham, but it's even more unfortunate that the city's white power structure left the Negro community with no alternative. In any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps: collection of the facts to determine whether or not injustices exist, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. We have gone through all these steps in Birmingham. There can be no gainsaying the fact that racial injustice engulfs this community. Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of brutality is widely known. Negroes have experienced grossly unjust treatment in the courts. There have been more unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches in Birmingham than any other city in the nation. These are hard, brutal facts of the case. And on the basis of these conditions, Negro leaders sought to negotiate with the city fathers, but the latter consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiation. You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issue that can no longer be ignored. My citing the creation of tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor may sound rather shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there is a type of constructive, nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth. Just as Socrates felt it was necessary to create a tension in the mind so that individuals could rise from the bondage of myths and half truths to the unfettered realm of creative analysis and objective appraisal, so must we seek the need for nonviolent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood. The purpose of our direct action program is to create a situation so crisis packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation. I therefore concur with you in your call for negotiation. Too long has our beloved Southland been bogged down in a tragic effort to live in a monologue rather than a dialogue. So again, very interesting how he discusses the need for tension. It comes back to the elemental point that protest and direct action is designed to make you feel so uncomfortable that you're moved to action. That is the underlying purpose. So the whole, oh, it's making us feel bad, or, oh, well, that's the whole point. That means it's working, right? Okay, returning back to Dr. King's words. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. I got to read that again. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed towards gaining political independence, but we still creep at horse and buggy pace towards gaining a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at will, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your Black brothers and sisters, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see the tears welling up in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see the ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort her personality by developing an unconscious bitterness towards white people. When you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old who is asking, Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean? When you take a cross-county drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you. When you're humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white and colored. When your first name becomes nigger. Your middle name becomes boy, no matter how old you are. And when your last name becomes John, and your wife and mother are never given the respected title of Mrs. When you're harried by day and haunted by night by the fact you are a Negro, living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and are plagued with inner fears and outer resentments, when you're forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern. Since we so diligently urge people to obey the Supreme Court's decision of 1954 outlawing segregation in the public schools, at first glance, it may seem rather paradoxical for us consciously break the law. One may well ask, how do you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal, but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. I mean, that's heavy, right? That's heavy. Now, what is the difference between the two? How does one determine whether a law is just or unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. To put it in terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal or natural law. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. It gives the segregator a false sense of superiority and the segregated a false sense of inferiority. Segregation, to use the terminology of the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber, substitutes an I-it relationship for an I-thou relationship and ends up relegating persons to the status of things. Hence, segregation is not only politically, economically, and sociologically unsound, it is morally wrong and sinful. Thus, it is that I can urge men to obey the 1954 decision of the Supreme Court, for it is morally right, and I can urge them to disobey segregation ordinances, for they are morally wrong. Let us consider a more concrete example of just and unjust laws. An unjust law is a code that a numerical or power majority group compels a minority group to obey, but does not make binding on itself. This is difference made legal. By the same token, a just law is a code that a majority compels a minority to follow and that it is willing to follow itself. This is sameness made legal. See what he did there? I mean, that right there is like super deep, because he is basically like, listen, if y'all are going to make a law that you're not willing to follow yourself, that's a problem, right? And that in and of itself makes the law immoral and unjust. Okay, continuing with his words. Throughout Alabama, all sorts of devious methods are used to prevent Negroes from becoming registered voters. And there are some counties in which, even though Negroes constitute a majority of the population, not a single Negro is registered. Can any law enacted under such circumstances be considered democratically structured? Sometimes a law is just on its face and unjust in its application. For instance, I have been arrested on a charge of parading without a permit. Now, there's nothing wrong in having an ordinance that requires a permit for a parade, But such an ordinance becomes unjust when it is used to maintain segregation and to deny citizens the First Amendment privilege of peaceful assembly and protest. Okay, y'all remember HB1 that now has become law in the state of Florida, which is known as the anti-protest bill, which basically speaks directly to Dr. King's point. That is an example of a law that may seem just on its face, right? But when it comes to how it's applied, the key and the whole purpose of it was to make sure that people weren't able to raise their voice around police brutality. This came to being as a result of the protests around George Floyd last summer. So again, history is rhyming. Returning to Dr. King's words, I hope you are able to see the distinction that I am trying to point out. In no sense do I advocate evading or defying the law as would the rabid segregationist. That would lead to anarchy. One who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. I submit that an individual who breaks the law that conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for the law. We should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal, and everything in the Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal. It was illegal to aid and to comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. Even so, I am sure that had I lived in Germany at the time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers. If today I lived in a communist country where certain principles dear to the Christian faith are suppressed, I would openly advocate disobeying that country's anti-religious laws. And this brings me, this is me editorializing again. This brings me to something that I keep seeing over and over again are people posting on social media that, if I was around back in the day, I would have done the right thing. I would have, tried to help an enslaved person. I would have done, I would have fought side by side with Dr. King, right? But here's the reality. What you're doing today is what you would have done back in the day. And if you're sitting here today criticizing people that are protesting, if you're here saying, okay, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I don't like when you take a knee on, during the Sunday night football game because that's interrupting my viewing, then guess what? Which is a heavier lift? Reposting something on social media to uplift marginalized communities, or actually going out and, back in the day, hiding an enslaved person that was trying to escape slavery? Right? When knowing that the police could come in, shoot you, kill you, shoot them, right? There's so much more that was physically on the line in the slavery days, as well as in the first civil rights movement, when, you went to a protest and you legit were going to get tear gassed, beaten, and dogs attacking you. So you're sitting here criticizing now. Guess what? Reality check. You wouldn't have come through for folks back then. Right? What you're doing now is exactly what you would have done back then, as Dr. King, pointed out so clearly. Returning to Dr. King's words, I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's greatest stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizens counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that law and order exist for the purpose of establishing justice. And when they fail in this purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that the present tension in the South is a necessary phase of the transition from an obnoxious negative peace in which the Negro passively accepted his unjust plight to a substantive and positive peace in which all men will respect the dignity and worth of human personality. Actually, we who engage in nonviolent direct action are not the creators of tension. We merely bring it to the surface, and we merely bring to the surface the hidden tension, which is already alive. We bring it out into the open where it can be seen and dealt with. Like a boil that can never be cured so long as it is covered up, but must be opened with all of its ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light. Injustice must be exposed with all the tension its exposure creates to the light of human conscience and the air of natural opinion before it can be cured. So, when we think about what's happening now, right? And we think about the, charges that were leveled against, President Obama that, oh, he was the one who divided the country, or, we had been past racism and all of a sudden he gets elected and now, he created racism. Listen, the racism was already there, right? It was just under the surface and hadn't been given a venue to really come out. And between that, social media, people starting to feel more emboldened, like these keyboard assassins basically coming out, that is what has shown the ugly underbelly that has always existed, right? So more things to keep in mind. All right, returning to Dr. King's words. Gosh, there's just so much amazing stuff that I'm like, I'm trying to find the right pieces to pull out because, like I said, this letter is very long, and I really encourage you to read the letter from Birmingham Jail, when you get the chance. Returning to his words, you speak of our activity in Birmingham as extreme. At first, I was rather disappointed that fellow clergymen would see my nonviolent efforts as those of an extremist. I began thinking about the fact that I stand in the middle of two opposing forces in the Negro community. One is a force of complacency, made up in part of Negroes who, as a result of long years of oppression, are so drained of self-respect and a sense of somebodyness that they have adjusted to segregation. And in part, a few of the middle-class Negroes who, because of a degree of academic and economic security, and because in some ways they profit by segregation, have become insensitive to the problems of the masses. The other force is one of bitterness and hatred, and it comes perilously close to advocating violence. It is expressed in the various Black nationalist groups that are springing up across the nation, the largest and best being Elijah Muhammad's Muslim movement. Nourished by the Negro's frustration over the continued existence of racial discrimination, this movement is made up of people who have lost faith in America, who have absolutely repudiated Christianity, and who have concluded that the white man is an incorrigible devil. I have tried to stand between these two forces, saying that we need to emulate neither the do-nothingism of the complacent nor the hatred and despair of the Black nationalist. For there is the more excellent way of love and nonviolent protest. I am grateful to God that, through the influence of the Negro Church, the way of nonviolence has become an integral part of our struggle. If that philosophy had not emerged, by now, many streets of the South would, I am convinced, be flowing with blood. And I am further convinced that if our white brothers dismiss us as rabble-rousers and outside agitators, those of us who employ nonviolent direct action, and if they refuse to support our nonviolent efforts, millions of Negroes will, out of frustration and despair, seek solace and security in Black nationalist ideologies, a development that would inevitably lead to a frightening racial nightmare. Whew. Right there with that, right? Because, there was that whole debate between, Dr. King's approach versus Malcolm X's approach, and which is the best way to go, which is the way that was going to get us closer to equality and the goals that we seek. But I think the two, of them didn't exist in a vacuum. And I think they played off of each other in certain ways, right? I think a lot of folks, especially in those that held political power, found Dr. King more palatable because they knew, listen, do you want the ballot or the bullet guy, or do you want the peaceful guy, right? Pick your poison, because both of them are going to exist and their message is going to be heard and felt. So let's see. Going to read two more paragraphs for y'all before I wrap it up for today. But I really am going to keep encouraging you to read this, because there's just so many nuggets and jewels in here that apply to present day and everything we're dealing with right now. He continues talking about the white moderate when he says, perhaps I was too optimistic. Perhaps I expected too much. I suppose I should have realized that few members of the oppressor race can understand the deep groans and passionate yearnings of the oppressed race, and still fewer have the vision to see that injustice must be rooted out by strong, persistent, and determined action. I am thankful, however, that some of our white brothers in the South have grasped the meaning of this social revolution and committed themselves to it. They are still all too few in quantity, but they are big in quality. Some, such as Ralph McGill, Lillian Smith, Harry Golden, James McBride Dabbs, Ann Braden, and Sarah Patton Boyle, have written about our struggle in eloquent and prophetic terms. Others have marched with us down nameless streets of the South. They have languished in filthy, roach-infested jails, suffered the abuse and brutality of policemen who viewed them as dirty nigger lovers. Unlike so many of their moderate brothers and sisters, they have recognized the urgency of the moment and sensed the need for the powerful action antidotes to combat the disease of segregation. Let me take note of my other major disappointment. I have been so greatly disappointed with the white church and its leadership. Of course, there are some notable exceptions. I am not unmindful of the fact that each of you have taken some significant stands on this issue. I commend you, Reverend Stallings, for your Christian stand on this past Sunday in welcoming Negroes to worship service on a non-segregated basis. I commend the Catholic leaders of this state for integrating Spring Hill College several years ago. But despite these notable exceptions, I must honestly reiterate that I have been disappointed with the church. I do not say this as one of those negative critics who can always find something wrong with the church. I say this as a minister of the gospel who loves the church, who was nurtured in its bosom, who has been sustained by its spiritual blessings, and who will remain true to it as long as the cord of life shall lengthen. In spite of my shattered dreams, I came to Birmingham with the hope that the religious leadership of this community would see the justice of our cause and with deep moral concern would serve as the channel through which our grievances could reach the power structure. I had hoped each of you would understand, but again, I have been disappointed. Yeah. So that's the real Dr. King. That's the Dr. King that, is outside of the I have a dream speech. This is the real context of the struggles that he was dealing with within the Black community, within, the faith-based community, and within the white community who was like, listen, yeah, we support, the end of segregation and equality, but we just don't like the way you're going about it. Okay, so what's your suggestion? Right? I mean, at the bottom line, you're criticizing everything, but you're not coming to the table with a strategy that's going to be effective. So there you have it. So I just wanted to really highlight his words and really honor his words today. I wanted everyone to really sit with this and think about it, and also think about it in the context of today's civil rights movement. Because make no mistake, we're in the second civil rights movement as we're fighting redistricting and how maps are being drawn to really dilute the power of Black and brown communities. As we're looking at unprecedented fight against voting rights. We see that the Voting Rights Act that would really honor the legacy of Dr. King is in danger of not moving in Congress, right? As a result of two Democratic senators that were like, you know what, we're not down for this, right? So these are the things that we need to be centered in the lessons from the past as we fight forward today. And we also need to call out the foolishness and keep it out. Because too often we'll call out an issue and then we'll back away from it. We lose interest. We move on to the next thing. We have to call out issues. We have to call out injustice, and we have to keep it out so that people do not catch amnesia when it's time to go to the ballot box, right? Because people, again, have short attention spans. And, because of life and everything else, we have to stay vigilant. We have to call it out and keep it out. So in order to honor Dr. King, the way we do that is by living his lessons, by sticking together, fighting for justice, uplifting each other, using our platforms to uplift the words of marginalized people, and make sure that we are fighting for liberty and justice for all. So with that, thank you all for tuning in. Next week, I'm going to be talking about what I'm watching this year from the legislative session in Florida, as well as huge Supreme Court cases coming this year and other criminal cases that are going to speak to either police brutality or other key issues. So I'm going to give a rundown on that. So stay tuned, and y'all take good care, stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Bye, y'all.